So, without further ado, let me get into the detail. Let's have a look at what we're covering today. The agenda for today is I'm going to give you a backdrop about narcissism, basically, and also bullying, because not all bullies are narcissists, but all narcissists are bullies. And I think this is a really, really important topic, hence why I do so much training on it. And I know from all the emails and the messages I get from people on social media that this is really huge. So I want to give a bit of a backdrop around narcissism. I'm going to talk about the drivers. I'm going to talk about the common traits that we see in narcissism, because there are some common traits that we see across, and also who are their victims. I get so many questions around that, especially from people who are almost what we would call repeat victims. I'll get people coming to me on not having one-to-one coaching saying, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I not see the signs? Why do I keep attracting these types of people? So hopefully, just bear with me a second. Got a bit of a sniffle coming on. So hopefully I'll answer some of those questions. Then we're going to look at the narcissistic abuse cycle. And I think this is really important. And I will talk about it from a workplace scenario, but I'm also going to talk about it from a personal scenario as well. So how it might manifest in relationships. I won't dwell too much on personal relationships, but I think it's important just to touch on it. Then I'm going to get into the piece around support and advice. I'm going to talk about the Duluth power and control model, which really fits in with this. It's an adaptive model that's been adapted from bullying and coercion in personal relationships. It's been adapted for a workplace. Then I'm going to be talking about why narcissism can be hard to spot. I have done quite a bit around covert narcissism. Can a narcissist change? And I think we probably know the answer for that. Quite a bit of advice for individuals. So I'm going to talk about grey rock. I'm going to talk about setting boundaries, all of that good stuff. And because I've got a lot of people who have signed up for this who I know are HR people, I've just got one quick slide. I won't dwell on organisations, but I've got a quick slide on that as well. Then we'll go into the Q&A at the end. So, as I said to the people who are with me live, if you could just make a note, you can either put them in the Q&A or the comments box, doesn't matter which to me. Just save them up as we go through and I'll answer everything at the end. So, hope that's okay. There will be, as I say, a workbook or a fact sheet that goes along with today, but please do make your own notes as we go through the admin bit. Trigger warning for some people on this, because I am going to be talking about some quite difficult situations. This is not meant as a replacement for professional psychological or medical support or advice. This session will focus on basics to raise awareness. It is not meant as a diagnostic tool. In no way am I recommending that we try and go away and diagnose people after this session. That's not what this is for. Please take responsibility for your own well-being as we go through this session, because again, I've delivered this probably to 1,500 people now, and some people just, it can set hairs running, if you like. It can trigger some things. So just please be mindful of that. And you use the tools and techniques and information that I share with you at your own risk. That's the little disclaimer there that we have to do. So let's take a look now at common traits. Kicking off with the underlying drivers of the narcissist. And again, it's like I said earlier, not all bullies are narcissists, but all narcissists are bullies. And that's why I want to cover off narcissism. And some of these things very much are the same for bullies as well. So with every bully I've ever come across, and if you've seen Lizzie, you will know, you see my YouTube channel, I had a very bad bullying experience about 15 years ago now, which actually made me leave the job I was in And it turned out well because now I'm doing what I'm doing now. I spent 15 years in HR before I set up my own coaching practice 15 years ago. And had I not been severely bullied, I would not be doing what I'm doing now and I would not have helped thousands of people. So I kind of look at it as a double edged sword. But in the 15 years that I've been researching into bullying and narcissism, because I just did a big deep dive on it, these are the main things I see all of the time. And the first one is insecurity. Believe it or not, many narcissists, all narcissists, and all bullies are massively insecure. We don't necessarily see it that way because they're full of bravado and they put themselves out there as if they know everything. But actually, the underlying driver of narcissism is insecurity. They tend to have incredibly low self esteem. They feel unworthy. They tend to have very low self confidence. And underneath all of that is shame. Because one thing I haven't put on the slides here that I think it's worth talking about is narcissists, unlike psychopaths, and we're not talking about psychopaths here, although I have met a few and I'm certain you will as well. We don't necessarily know again whether it's a psychopath or a narcissist. With narcissists, they are not born narcissists. They either tend to learn that behavior through copying a parent who is narcissistic, or they're mistreated, usually by a caregiver. And so it turns them into that narcissism. So they have that massive insecurity, massive low self esteem, all of those feelings of unworthiness and shame and low self-confidence. And so to cover up that, they project onto other people. So they build themselves up. And if you see my content, you'll know I say this so many times. Narcissists and any type of bully, because all bullies have those things going on, build themselves up by putting other people down. That ingrained deep insecurity, shame, and low self confidence. That's what they're trying to mask, and they're projecting their own issues onto other people. So that's a really, really important point. And I know with all of the people that I've coached over the years, and when I started to do my research into bullying and narcissism, that was the one thing that actually made me feel a little bit better because these people are not the grandiose, marvelous people that they think they are, nor do they feel they are deep down. It's bravado, it's covering up. That doesn't make it any the less hurtful and destructive to others, but I think it can help you understand their behavior, not sympathize with it, not forgive them, but it can help you in your own healing. So narcissistic types, again, there are many narcissistic types. I'm just pulling out, and this is not diagnostic, by the way, I'm just pulling out the ones that you see most frequently, especially in workplaces. So the narcissistic types, we have the grandiose, the bigger than life, the look at me, aren't I amazing? We have the malignant types and the antagonistic types, the ones that are really cruel. The malignant and the antagonistic tend to be really cruel, snarly, and they tend to be like that with everybody. They're not particularly covert about their bullying. What they want is power, control, authority. They have a deep rooted need to win. They want to dominate people. They tend to be arrogant and pretentious. The red ones are where they differ from the next group because there are some common traits, but the red ones there are the ones for the grandiose, malignant, and antagonistic. These are the ones that are just those really nasty, mean types that you see quite frequently. They're the ones that we tend to think about when we think about narcissists. The other type, though, which can be a bit more hidden and a bit more difficult to see, are what we call covert or vulnerable narcissists. So they're the ones who are not outwardly as grandiose. They're not outwardly as cruel. They tend to be more the victims. Oh, poor me. Why does everything bad happen to me? They tend to do things under the table. They tend to be very clever about their abuse. So they don't tend to do the abuse in front of everybody. It can be very clever and very covert. And then we have the communal narcissist. And we will all know a communal narcissist. We might not necessarily know them in person, but you will definitely have seen them on social media. Communal narcissists are the ones that get involved. One of the big things that they do is get involved in charities and socially acceptable, whatever the thing is of the moment that people are campaigning on. And the communal narcissist will join whatever group happens to be out there at the time. And they don't do it necessarily because they believe in the cause or they believe in the charity. But what you will see are lots of selfies. You'll see lots of self promotion and, oh, look at me, aren't I? Lots of this. Oh, look at me, aren't I good? I'm on this march for whatever it happens to be. So the communal narcissists are quite different. You wouldn't necessarily know. But if you look behind, they don't really care about the cause. They're just there to get the photographs. They're there to get the kudos. These are the people that I see online that are the trolls, the ones that just want to pick on people and just kind of get in there and are really mean and quite cruel. So the difference, again, they want power, they want control, they want authority and a need to win, but they often have a victim mentality and tend to be quite compliant. And that's where that kind of covert bit comes in, because they won't necessarily show their true colours, unlike the grandiose type, in front of everybody. So these are the main ones we tend to see in the workplace. And actually, often the covert ones can be the most difficult to deal with because they're not mean, cruel, nasty in front of everybody. They're very manipulative. So, narcissistic traits. And again, this is not diagnostic, but what I would say as well is we all have a little bit of some of these. Um, so I don't want you looking at yourself and thinking, "Oh my gosh, I must be a narcissist because I've got some of those." No, these traits coupled with what I'm going to go through when we talk about the narcissistic cycle of abuse is what we're talking about here, because everybody is a little bit self-centered. Of course we are. Everybody has some of these things, but it's to the level that these people do it. So let's take a look. Grandiose self-worth. Talked about that on the other slide. It's this full of their own importance. They think they're absolutely amazing. They believe, or they outwardly show that they're better than everybody else. They might dress differently. They might talk a lot about their latest car or yacht or their fabulous holiday. It's all about them. They're very grandiose. And what you do find often behind this grandiosity are massive credit card bills, huge amounts of debt, but they just want to project this outward display of how well they're doing. And they tend to want to make themselves appear to be better than everyone else. But if we go back to what we said, what drives them, underneath that is that shame, is that low self-worth, is that not feeling good enough. We often see superficial charm, and this is where we see in a workplace scenario how these types of people can often get away with their behavior. Because I work with organizations that they've got narcissism going on, and I will maybe do some three-way coaching, and I'll go back to the HR team and say, I think we might have a bit of a narcissist going on here. Obviously, I don't diagnose, but I'll say there's lots of narcissistic traits there and the things that are troubling me. And often it will be, what? Oh my goodness, no, that person's so lovely. But when I've dug down deeply enough with the questioning that I do, I will see that that charm is superficial and they're playing a part and being highly manipulative. This is a really interesting one. They have no empathy whatsoever. And to be honest, one of the things, because I'm very highly tuned to narcissism now, and I know that if I tell somebody something, a story or something that maybe has happened to me, or, I'm relaying something and there's nothing coming back from that person, they just go, oh, that is always a bit of a red flag for me when there's nothing there, when that person doesn't have any empathy for the story I'm telling. That's always a bit of a red flag. So narcissists have no empathy for other people. They can mimic it. So they kind of know that if there's a bereavement or if somebody's going through a hard time, they have to go, oh, I'm sorry about that. But they don't really mean it. They can mimic it, don't mean it. It's not deep. And so that's actually a massive red flag for me. If you meet somebody and you're telling them a story about something awful that happened, and they just go, oh, red flag. They lie with ease. And this is really, I think, one of the scariest ones is that they have no issue with lying. They will lie straight to your face. And I think this is one of the confusing things, especially when you're trying to identify it in a workplace, because we don't expect people to lie barefaced, straight while looking us in the eyes. We tend to think that we could be able to tell if somebody was lying. But narcissists, because they have no empathy, because they don't have the kind of same types of feelings that non-narcissists do, it's very easy for them to lie. And that's, again, part of the manipulation, why they're really good at that. As I say, highly, highly, highly manipulative, because they have no morals. They don't, as long as they can get away, because the biggest thing with a narcissist is that they don't want to take responsibility. They're never going to take responsibility. That's the thing that they are always trying to avoid. And so they are massively manipulative. They don't care that they lie. And this is why it's really hard sometimes to spot them. They have no remorse, no guilt for anything they've done. So if you sat down and said to an narcissist, you did this. No, I didn't. That's the gaslighting as well. And we'll talk about that later. They have poor behavior controls. So they might be able to put this mask on for a while, but at some point it's going to come out. So if they're having to mask all day and pretend that they're nice people and pretend that they've got lots of empathy, you better believe they're going to go home and take it out on somebody at home. They can't control their emotions for very long, so somebody's going to get it, because they can't be one way at work and a different way at home without it impacting. That I've already mentioned. Whenever you look at any interviews with people who've been diagnosed with narcissism, they will say, I do whatever I can to avoid taking responsibility. I will do whatever. I will gaslight you. I will lie. I will do whatever I can because I am never going to take responsibility. So that's a really important one to know as well. They can be very shallow. They're prone to boredness. And when they're bored, that's when they start covert tactics and getting what we call narcissistic supply, because to narcissists, they get great joy out of hurting other people. And this again seems so out of the realms of possibility. But if you've come across these types of people, it kind of starts to make sense. So when they start to feel bored, that's when they'll start to pick on somebody, because what they're wanting is that narcissistic supply, that reaction. That's what they're always after. And that's why when we come to talk about the grey rock technique later, it's taking that supply away from them. They're experts at mimicking when you first meet them. And I'll talk about that when we come on to the love bombing phase in a little minute. They're really, really good at making it look like they're empathizing with you and that they understand you and that they like the same things as you. It's part of the tactic in the love bombing phase. They have a sense of entitlement. They think they're better than everyone else, so they're entitled to more than everybody else. They're always seeking external validation because there's nothing inside. So they have to go outside. They can't give that validation to themselves because what did we say on the other slide about them having low self-worth, low self-esteem. Inside, there's nothing. So they need to go and get their validation externally. And basically, they are driven by a need to control because typically these people had very little control when they were children. They were probably controlled by a narcissist when they were little. And so it's all about control. It's all about almost righting a wrong. So who are their victims? Well, it can be anybody. Anybody can be the victim of a narcissist. However, they're particularly good targets are people that have a belief that everyone is inherently good. And so we go looking for the good in everyone. These are the ones I see in organizations saying, oh, it's just him being him, or he's just, or she's just had a bad day, but actually it can kind of ramp up because they do like an easy target. If somebody has been raised by a narcissistic caregiver, if you've been raised by a narcissistic caregiver, you don't necessarily see the red flags because their behavior was what you grew up with. So if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, then that's normal to you. And so you won't necessarily push back on them maybe until it's too late, until it's really started to affect you. So they're like a seek and find missile, these people as well. They can go and find people who are not going to push back. And that's one of the things that they do. People pleasers, people who are high empathy and high sensitivity. And that actually often goes with the narcissistic or bullying caregiver because people pleasers, most people pleasers, or I should say, people pleasing starts with parent pleasing. So if you're a people pleaser and you were taught to keep the peace, if you had that role as a child in your upbringing, then again, you're going to be kind of pandering a bit more to the narcissist and maybe trying to keep the peace and trying to keep things quiet, and maybe pandering is a strong word, but conflict to you might be really unsafe. And so you go into that mode of trying to keep the peace and trying to keep things nice and calm, basically because it rattles your nervous system. However, that said, so there are those particular types that it's weird. It's like they can literally smell it out. And I'll tell you why that is in a couple of slides, but they particularly target professional people, independent people, strong people, well liked, intelligent, happy people, because what they're trying to do is strip that. They don't have any of that. So they want to strip it away from others. Big one here is anyone whom they perceive to be a threat, they're going to target. If they think you've got the mark of them, if they think you can see through them and you aren't playing their games, that's like game on to some narcissists. So it can be really difficult. So they're the common traits that we see. And again, this is not diagnostic. This is just to highlight the types of things that we tend to see, and so that you've got more of an idea if you're noticing any of these types of behaviors. And of course, I've talked about it from a workplace setting, but these behaviors are the same if you meet somebody in a personal relationship. Not all narcissists are men. They reckon, although there's no real way of telling this, but they reckon it's about 80-20. So 80% men, 20% women. But it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to diagnose a narcissist because they won't go. They won't go and get diagnosed because they don't think there's anything wrong with them. So that's really difficult because the numbers are very skewed, because a narcissist is never going to go to counselling or therapy unless it's in their interest. Maybe we'll touch on that later. Let's look at the abuse cycle. So this, I think, probably whenever I'm working with people on a one-to-one who've been going through bullying, or even when I'm training this in to people, I think this is the most surprising thing, and it was the most surprising thing when I started to research narcissism way back when, because It was just tick, 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 tick. It was really interesting for me to realize that there was a structure, that there was an actual process that these people go through, and I could literally tick everything off off the list. So let's have a look at that. There are 4 stages, and this is the same whether it's a personal relationship or a work-based relationship or even a friend, because we often have friends who are narcissists and we don't necessarily pick up on it because we may not spend that much time with them. But all starts with the love bombing phase. So let's look at this from a work scenario. It tends to be the shortest of all of the phases. It's a few weeks, usually, to a few months. This phase is designed to gain your trust as quickly as possible. So you might hear things like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're on my team." So they're gonna align with you very, very quickly. They're gonna target in on you really quickly. And these are the things that you might hear. "I'm so glad you're on my team. I truly value you and your opinion. I wish everyone else was like you. I think you're amazing. We're on the same wavelength. I don't know what I'd do without you. I'm so lucky to have found you and that you're on my team. You really understand me. You really get me." They're the types of things that we see. And for some people, that can be really lovely. All of that validation. "Oh my goodness, this person really gets me. How lovely." Because what they're doing is they're aligning with you, like we said on the earlier slide, they're aligning with you. This is very highly manipulative because unfortunately, they don't actually mean any of those things. But what this does, and this is the same whether it's in a work relationship or a personal relationship, in a personal relationship, it will move very quickly. So they'll move very quickly to "I love you," and it will be like kind of 3 weeks in, and they're declaring their love. They're whisking you off to Paris for a weekend. They're taking you here, there, and everywhere. They're displaying intense interest in you. They're sending texts all over the place. They're ringing you up, last voice before you go to sleep, first voice when you wake up. That's the kind of love bombing phase in a personal relationship. What they're doing is flooding you with oxytocin, whether that's work or personal. When you get all of that validation, it feels good and we want more of it. And so, especially in a work scenario, we're trying to please that person then and doing more. And don't forget, they've already probably sussed out that you might be a people pleaser, that you might not see their red flags. Because other people might go, "Oh, that's a bit much. Oh, yeah. I don't know that I want to be talking from a work scenario. I don't know that I want to be talking to you at night." Or even in a personal relationship, "Oh, hang on. Ooh, easy, tiger. Slow down a little bit." But they're testing this out. The people who push back and put boundaries in, well, I won't bother with those. They're not going to target those people anymore. But those who are also looking for validation because maybe, they have a bit more people pleasing, it's very easy for them to find out because most people won't put up with that. They'll go, "Yeah, that's nice. Thanks very much. But that's a bit weird." But people who are maybe after a bit more validation won't. So that's why they get away with it. We're so aligned, we're so alike. They're mimicking and they're wanting to align with you. So it starts very quickly. It's like a whirlwind. They display intense interest in you, whether it's the work or whether it's a personal relationship. It may include, from a work perspective, it may include invites to outside work activities or events or catch ups or dinner. They're going to mimic your likes and dislikes. It will be, "Oh my goodness, I've been there, I've done that, I like that too." When actually, they don't, you'll find out at some point later they don't. They were just saying it because they wanted to align with you. They get you to let your guard down because when we think we're in this really nice relationship, whether it's work or personal, we let our guards down. We talk more, we're more free. And that's the whole point of this love bombing phase. They are doing what they can to gain all of the trust that they possibly can from you, because they want you to trust them so that they can get more information and they can get you on their side. They are learning everything they can about you. And because you think this person is so amazing, you might start to share things that you wouldn't necessarily share with other people. And that's where the problem comes in, because again, going back to the traits, we don't expect people to not be who they present themselves as. We don't expect people to barefaced lie. But these people are out there. What they're doing is what we call data mining. This is a narcissistic phrase, the phrase that we use in kind of narcissism. They're data mining. What they're doing, it sounds so calculated, and it is, they're trying to find out as much information about you as possible that they can use at a later date. Crazy, isn't it? But oof, it's tough. So the red flags to look out for when we're talking about love bombing is when you've never felt so heard, seen, or understood. If that happens, just take a little breather, just take a little step back, because again, for some of us, it's amazing to be so validated, but actually, there's no substance to it. You feel like you found your work soulmate, and in a personal relationship, you'll feel like you've found your soulmate. And I'm not saying that can't happen, that you can't meet somebody quickly and fall in love and get married and live happily ever after. However, I would, been through what I've been through, I would definitely just urge a little bit of caution there. You let your guard down and you don't even know this person. So that's a red flag. You tell them things you've never told another person before, or you feel like you can talk freely to them and start divulging things you maybe haven't even told your partner. However, that said, there will be little uncomfortable niggles, but you won't really realize why. So it's noticing that little thing in your stomach that goes, something not quite right here, because your nervous system will be picking up on that and it will be alerting you. But you might not necessarily be able to pinpoint what's wrong, but you will get a feeling that something's not quite right. You might feel the need to overshare with them and then think to yourself, why did I do that? Why did I say that? You think they're being intrusive. You get that, oh gosh, that's a bit, I don't, that's a bit rude. I don't know that I should answer that. But you don't feel like you can say anything because you've built up this amazing rapport. You're worried about hurting their feelings because they're such a great guy. They ask you lots of personal questions, more than you would usually get from a workplace scenario, because we tend to kind of have just a little bit of an area that we don't really discuss unless we've known that person for a while. These people don't know anything about boundaries, and they will ask difficult questions. They will ask you things because they don't have the empathy. They don't have any understanding. They don't necessarily realize when they're crossing over a boundary. And so you just kind of, it's a red flag, but you answer anyway. Just be mindful of that one. Something feels off, but you can't put your finger on it. So that's the love bombing phase. But very quickly, we get into what I think is the most destructive phase. So, in the love bombing phase, you are flooded with oxytocin. Oxytocin is the love hormone. We all need oxytocin. Oxytocin makes us feel safe. It's one that we get when we're in crowds. We get it from hugging our partners. It's a really important hormone. Um, and when it floods us, that's kind of when we get, in the beginning of a personal relationship, we tend to be flooded with oxytocin. And that's why things can get kind of quite heated quite quickly. I don't think I need to say any more about that. But it's all down to the oxytocin. But we get that again in the love bombing phase of any type of relationship. But then we move on to devaluation. That's phase 2, tends to be the longest of the phases, and it can actually last for years. It's the most destructive bit. It's a slow erosion of confidence and self-esteem. It typically starts with one small thing, one put down, one rude comment, one thing that makes you go, oh, but you don't necessarily say anything, especially if you were brought up to just gloss over things like that and you don't like conflict. Other people will go, don't think so, don't speak to me like that. And then necessarily do the devaluation again with that person. But if you don't have strong boundaries and you don't pull them up, they're gonna jump on that because they the first little time they do the devaluation, they're tiptoeing to see how much they can get away with and whether you're receptive to it. So it's really quite interesting. Never ever let a first devaluation go unchecked because it will only escalate. That's why all this awareness is so important. In a work-based scenario, they might start to set unreasonable, unrealistic expectations or goals, things that you can't possibly reach. It could be they put you on a project but don't give you enough time. They might ask you to do something but don't give you enough resources, really kind of setting you up to fail. If you tackle them and say something to them, they're going to have an answer to everything. So that's where the gaslighting comes in. We'll talk about that in a little while. They may take credit for your work. It's a very common one. They will weaponize your weaknesses. Because don't forget, you've already told them all your weaknesses during the love bombing phase. Because they have asked you lots of personal questions. They know about your childhood. They know how you were raised. They know where your weaknesses are. They know how to weaponize that. So that's why it's important to know about the love bombing phase and not to divulge too much too quickly. They might use, this is really common, so it can usually starts with a derogatory comment. They might mock you, shame you, humiliate you, especially in front of other people. Then they might say something like, oh, it's only a joke. Well, if you go, hey, hang on a minute, that's not nice. Oh, isn't he joking? You don't get my sense of humour. Oh my goodness, that's so common. I hear that so frequently from clients that that's where it started. So it might be in front of other people, it might be on your own. But that's a really important one to look out for. Then we have what we call triangulation. So this is usually when it's starting to move on a little while. Triangulation is where they use other people against each other. So they're starting to create an us and them. So they're creating a little clique of people. Or they might even have a couple of little cliques and play them off against each other. They'll tell this group one thing, they'll tell that group another thing, then they'll sit back and notice it all explode because they get lots of narcissistic supply from that. Ooh, goody, goody. And that's what they thrive off, this narcissistic supply. They thrive off chaos. They thrive off hurting people. Again, this is why we can't necessarily get our heads around it. But it's really important to know they use what we call flying monkeys. I've seen this firsthand where they will get people on their side. And even though those people know that their behavior towards one person, so say I had a boss that was bullying me, which I did happen to, the rest of the team could see that, but they were so scared of it happening to them that they would start to bully me. That's really quite common. That's what flying monkeys are. They go around and they do their bidding, or you will tell them something and they'll take it back to the narcissist. So that's where they like to use other people against you, and they're very good at manipulation, as I've said. So they will be playing people off all over the place. How they manage to keep it all in their heads is beyond me, but that's how they usually become undone when they're starting to do too much triangulation and flying monkeys. They will set you up for failure in a workplace scenario. Incidentally, triangulation and flying monkeys in a personal relationship might look like they'll have a group of friends who they'll be telling that, oh, she's crazy, she's a nutcase, or he's this or he's that, and turn those people against you. So that's really quite common in a personal relationship, or they'll use their family against you. They'll tell them stories about things that you're saying when they're not true. They will use gaslighting. Gaslighting comes from the 1937, I think it was. It was in the 30s. It was a play that was turned into a movie in, I think, 1942, and the premise is a guy tries to make his wife think that she's crazy by adjusting the gas lights, the light going up and down and moving things in the house. So she went to find something and she'd say, I put that there, and he'd say, no, you didn't. And so slowly, 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 he was trying to make her think that she was crazy. Gaslighting we see really frequently. I've got an entire video on gaslighting. So what I will do, rather than go into gaslighting in a lot of detail, I will attach a link so you can go and have a look at that. Gaslighting is really common. What they're trying to do, again, is divert your attention. Gaslighting is one of the number one tools that narcissists use and bullies use. Because they don't want to take responsibility for what they're doing. So if you pull them up about something and say, you've done this, they'll say, what about that thing you did 5 years ago? And you're like, why are you bringing that up again? We sorted that. And then all of a sudden they've done what they wanted to do. They've deflected you away from their bad behavior. Now all of a sudden you're having an argument about something that happened months, weeks, years ago. That's gaslighting. They're just throwing anything out there in the hope that it will stick. And it's the things like, you just don't get my sense of humour. So common. So have a look out for those. Red flag, confusion. Whenever you feel confused by somebody's behaviour, that's the biggest red flag for me. Whenever I'm talking to somebody and I'm telling them something and they make me feel confused about their response, big red flag. You start to question yourself. You start to think, is it me? Have I done something wrong? You don't feel like you can challenge them. And if they do, they're going to go like gaslight you. You're too sensitive. You don't get my sense of humor. I never said that. You're crazy. You're an idiot. You're stupid. You feel like you're walking on eggshells and second guessing yourself all of the time. There are no boundaries. So they trample over every single boundary. That doesn't mean you can't reestablish them. But with them, once they think they've got you, there are no boundaries until you get really firm. You and others make excuses for their behaviour. Oh, they're overtired. Oh, they've got a lot on. Oh, they've got problems at work. Oh, they've got problems at home. So just watch out for those types of red flags. But the number one is confusion. What's happening here, and we definitely have trauma bonds in personal relationships. We also can get trauma bonds in workplace relationships, because here's the thing. They flooded you during the love bombing phase with oxytocin. Now you're getting flooded with cortisol and adrenaline because they're being mean and it's triggering your fight, flight, freeze. So then they'll drop you a love bomb for a second and you think, oh, lovely. So you get oxytocin again, and then they're mean to you again, and they're mean to you, and they're mean to you, and they're mean to you, but then they might be nice. Then they're mean to you, and they're mean. So it's this up and down, not just of your emotions, but it's up and down of biochemicals. So you're having that heady mix of oxytocin, the love hormone, then you're getting cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones, and you're yo-yoing between the two. And when you're really down because you're full of adrenaline and cortisol, you'll do anything to get a little bit of love bombing, to get a little bit of oxytocin. And that's what creates what we call a trauma bond between the two. And this is one of the reasons why in a personal relationship, it can take up to 7 goes for somebody to leave the relationship because they're trauma bonded. It is no longer about love. It's purely about biochemicals and what we call a trauma bond. So I thought it was quite important to discuss that. So the devaluation phase, more red flags, you start to feel physically sick. Your nervous system is very dysregulated. So you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. If you don't know what fawn is, there is a video on my YouTube channel about that. You're in survival mode. So when you're in survival mode because you're so stressed because you don't know what's going to happen next. So that's no different than living in a cave and being under continual attack from saber-toothed tigers. Our adrenaline and cortisol is triggering all of the time, and we're not meant to live like that. So it's going to affect your sleeping, your eating, your exercising, your concentration. We just can't live on high alert like that. You'll find it difficult to regulate your emotions. You experience feelings of low confidence, low self worth, like nothing you do is right. You just can't win. And so they're slowly, literally draining the life out of you. You might have had a previously unblemished career, and this is the most heartbreaking thing. I'll see people in their 40s and in their 50s who are going through this, who've had the most amazing careers, and all of a sudden they've come across a narcissist and it's almost destroyed them. It's just, this is again why I'm so passionate about raising awareness. So, there's some of the red flags. Then we have the discard phase. During the discard phase, they're bored of you at this point because you're probably a shadow of your former self. They've probably drained you dry of all the narcissistic supply because you maybe are just falling over them, or you're just too ill to care. And so you're no challenge anymore. I've wrung you out now. There's no point. I'm bored with you. You no longer present a challenge to them. You're not answering back. You're not giving them any supply, any narcissistic supply. You're a shadow of your former self. They've usually found another more exciting victim to replace you with at this point. They've usually found somebody else in a personal relationship. I will guarantee, and this is not always nice to hear, but I will guarantee they will have found another person, another relationship. Even though they might still have you there, they will definitely, because they have to have their narcissistic supply from somewhere. From a work perspective, they might try to orchestrate your departure from the department, or the talks about having you removed because you're underperforming. Red flags, they stop inviting you to meetings. They intentionally miss you off important communications. They stop talking to you. They intentionally withhold important information that you need to do your job. So all of a sudden, you might find out that the rest of your team had a meeting off site, or there's been a really important meeting about a project you're on that you knew nothing about, and you just simply haven't been invited. They've missed you off the circulation list for the team, or they don't return your calls. They make it difficult for you to do your job. One of the things that I do see as well is a lot of teams have their own WhatsApp groups, and very occasionally you'll see that people get taken off the WhatsApp group, and the WhatsApp group tends to be more outside work events. So just watch out for that kind of thing. And it's all of a sudden you don't get invited. One of the team is getting married, and you're the only one that doesn't get invited. And that's where that triangulation, the flying monkeys thing tends to come in, or they've all gone out for a meal after work and you haven't been invited. Again, it's the flying monkeys thing, and you're not on their WhatsApp group. So it's very hard to deal with. It's very demoralizing, and that's when it really affects your confidence, really affects pretty much everything, to be honest. Then we have the Hoover phase. The Hoover phase is when they're hoovering you back in. So it's vacuuming you back in. This phase, from a work-based scenario, typically happens when they think that you might become a threat. So when you say you're going to raise a grievance, when you resign or threaten to resign, or when you tell or threaten to tell somebody in authority, they can't risk that. And if they haven't managed to get you out of the team by their own means, and you then start to stand up to them and go, oh, no, I'm not having this. That's when they're going to do the Hoover phase. They need to save face. They need to gain back control. Because at this point, if you're going, oh, I'm going to tell somebody, I'm off, I'm resigning, oh, they don't want that, because that means that they're going to be exposed potentially. They can't have that. They need to gain back control. So they need to get you back on side. They need to divert attention off them and to keep you sweet. During the Hoover phase, they're going to give you a false sense of security. In a personal relationship, you might have threatened to leave or you might have actually left. And then they've gone, hang on a minute, I've lost control here. How did that happen? That is not acceptable. So I'm not having that. So then they're going to do the Hoover phase. Hoover red flags, they start being nice to you again. And it can be just one little, they make you a brew, they'll make you a drink, or they'll buy you a donut, or they'll just do one nice little thing. What happens then, if you're not too far gone, you'll get hit of oxytocin because your body remembers all the nice things they did for you during the love bombing phase. They'll drop what we call breadcrumbs, so little bits of niceness. They'll also do something, again, this is a narcissistic term, breadcrumbing and future faking is where they will promise you how things are going to be different in the future. So we call that future faking, but it is faking because they don't mean it. So they're going to promise you, oh, I'll get you that promotion. Oh, I'll get you that extra help. Oh, you can have some overtime. Oh, they're going to promise you things, but they won't be able to deliver them. So they tend to be Hoover red flags. So that then it can literally start again, the love bombing, although the love bombing will be literally a couple of days. It's not going to be long in a work scenario. In a personal scenario, you might get it to last a couple of weeks, but you'll start very quickly back on the devaluation because they know they've won. And that's why it can take 7 cycles of that often for a person, man or woman, doesn't matter. Gender is not an issue here. It's the same process. It can take 7 goes for somebody to leave another person in a personal relationship. So hopefully that explains the abuse cycle. Again, if you've got any questions on that, I'll answer them at the end. Then I wanted to touch on this workplace bullying power and control wheel. I've mentioned it earlier at the beginning. This is an adaptation of the Duluth power and control wheel. It talks about coercive control. It was originally designed to help people spot coercive control, narcissism, and bullying in personal relationships, but it works equally as well. It's been amended for workplaces. So if we look at, first off, using intimidation. So making workers feel uncomfortable or afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying property. So that's the first segment, using intimidation. And again, you might not see every one of these in a bullying scenario, but you'll definitely see some of them. And any one of these is one too many. And I send this is also in your fact sheet as well. So again, it's about raising awareness because some people don't necessarily realize that they're being bullied. But if you're ticking any of these off, it's a good chance there's bullying going on there. Using emotional abuse, putting workers down, making them feel bad about themselves, name calling, making them think that they're crazy, playing mind games, humiliating and using guilt. Then we have using isolation. This goes hand in hand almost to what I was saying about the flying monkeys and the turning people against you. Using isolation is a big tool that a lot of narcissists and bullies will use. So they will control what you do, who you talk to, what you read, where you go, limit outside involvement. So they might really keep you isolated. And I did do an article, I think I did a video on it as well, that when we get excluded from a group, we often can experience what we call rejection sensitivity dysphoria. That definitely happens with people who are neurodivergent, or not definitely, but it's a large part of neurodivergence, although it's not part of the diagnostic criteria. But we are tribal animals. We need to be around people. And back to our early caveman times, if we got separated from the group, it meant certain death. And so if you were banished from the tribe, you were pretty much out on your own and little chance of you surviving. So it's deeply inbuilt in us to be part of the group. And, you know, we use isolation as a punishment in prisons, don't we? Because we know it makes us very ill. if we're isolated, we don't get oxytocin. Oxytocin is a safety hormone as well as the love hormone. It's a safety hormone. And when we're excluded, it triggers off a part in the brain, the same part that registers physical pain. It's that painful to us. Again, throwback to our early ancestors, but it's still there. Narcissists and bullies will use isolation as a weapon. They will minimize, deny, and blame. So they will make light of abuse, not take concerns about it seriously. They'll deny that the abuse even happened. They'll shift responsibility because what did I say earlier? They're never going to take responsibility. They will blame the worker for the abuse. So they will do a flip. I've seen that happen where the abuser has blamed the other person. I've actually had a real recent experience where the manager of this particular person was managing somebody who was quite clearly, to me, when I went in and did all my research and all my kind of investigation, that the person had very narcissistic tendencies and was bullying the boss. So that was a really, because that person was blaming the boss, when actually, when I did very detailed, very thorough investigation, I found that it was absolutely the other way around. So it's really quite interesting. They will use co-workers. They will make co-workers feel guilty about the work levels of others, using co-workers to relay messages, that's that triangulation, from the employer, threatening to terminate the co-worker if tasks aren't done. Using employer privilege, so treating workers like servants, making decisions without proper input, and acting very authoritarian. So there's no kind of two-way, it's my way or the highway. Using economic abuse, threatening to terminate workers and or reduce their pay. Now, in the UK, that's pretty tough to do that. But it's if you're already feeling low, your confidence is knocked, you've been having all of these things said to you, it's really not out of the realms to listen to that and to have that play on your mind and for that to kind of get into your psyche. They might threaten to ruin your reputation in the sector. I've definitely seen that with individuals I've done one-to-one coaching with, especially senior people, where they've been absolutely terrified that this person, and because they look like a person of standing that people listen to, because that's the way they've positioned themselves to be with the grandiosity, they've been really, really worried about their future career, their next career move, because they're worried about maybe a bad reference or somebody ringing them. So that can be really, really difficult to deal with. Next, we have using coercion and threats. So making or carrying out threats to hurt a worker or making things exceptionally difficult. I did hear a story, but I didn't hear about it firsthand, about somebody actually getting physically hurt through a accident at work, which just, when you start to get into these things, a whole world opens up that you don't even realize is there. Could be threatening to shut down the facility, forcing workers to engage in illegal or unsafe work. So that's the power and control wheel. And again, I think that's really useful because it allows you to kind of tick things off to see whether those things are happening. The headings are very similar let me just see if I can go back to the full thing. There we go. The headings are very similar if it's a personal relationship. So it would be the same in using intimidation, using emotional abuse. And, for a lot of people who I've dealt with over the years, they will very clearly say that emotional abuse leaves far worse scars than physical abuse. Not that either there is one better than the other, but emotional abuse, people, scars can heal, physical scars, but emotional abuse can last a long, long time. Using isolation, That's one of the main tactics we see in a narcissistic relationship, personal relationship, is when they will isolate their victim from the rest of their family. That's one of the main tactics because they know that the family will be able to see through the behavior. And so it's in their interest to keep the person away from their family. They might even say, I don't like your family, I don't like your mum, I don't like, and they're going to make it very, very difficult. It's going to be a choose them or choose me scenario. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. That's all the gaslighting that we've talked about. Using co-workers, well, they might use friends or other people to do that kind of triangulation. Using their privilege as it's a bit, I think it's slightly different in the relationship one, but again, it's using their privilege. It could be economic abuse as well. Kind of, I heard of one really recently. One client was telling me that her ex-partner, if she fell out with him, he would cut off her credit cards. So she would be out shopping, getting their weekly shop, and she'd go to pay, and he would track her on her phone. And when she got to the till, he would cut off the credit card so she couldn't pay. Then obviously we have the coercion and threats. So that power and control wheel can be used both ways. And again, there is a copy of it. Just let me whiz back through. There is a copy of it in the fact sheet, which you'll get after the session. Okay, doing okay for time. Goodo, goodo. Okay, let me go back there. Let's do a quick overview. It's quite a lot when you're just talking. So we went through all of the different common traits, who their victims are. We've gone through the abuse cycle, so the love bombing, devaluation, discard, and hoover. And we've done the Duluth power and control wheel. Hope you're still with me. I know this is loads, but I do have videos that are very similar to this as well. I'm just hopefully going into it in a more detail than what's in those videos. You will, of course, also get the fact sheet that goes with this. Okay, let me just have a slurp of water and then we'll carry on. Okie dokie, support and advice. So, why it can be difficult to spot narcissism in the workplace. As I've already mentioned, both narcissism and bullying can be covert. We don't necessarily see it with everybody because, as I said, there are different types of narcissism, there are different types of bullying, and narcissists are highly manipulative. They are not necessarily going to show their behaviors to everybody. Just because someone doesn't seem like a bully doesn't mean that they aren't a bully. The example that I gave you before about the workplace scenario, the manager was a man and the employee was a woman. She looked like butter wouldn't melt. She looked so pleasant. She was so pretty and she was so lovely. But underneath it, when you spoke to her, when you heard all of the things, because I'm going to tell you what you should be doing if you think you're being bullied, when you looked at all the things that this person had been doing, but to the other management team, she was presenting herself as sweetness and light. And this can happen the other way around as well. I've seen this with HR teams, or where I've been working with somebody on a one-to-one, because they've actually got out of that scenario, moved to their new job. So they've managed to get themselves out. But it comes with them because they hadn't processed what had happened to them. They were now struggling in their new job because they had their confidence so eroded that they hadn't processed anything and it was coming out. They were getting imposter syndrome in their new job. Let me just, sorry, I thought I'd had my phone on mute and I clearly haven't. So it's really important that we don't just dismiss people because it can be anybody who does this. And don't forget, they're very manipulative and very good at hiding who they are. Narcissists and bullies choose their victims carefully. They're very calculated. Some bully everybody, but they tend to be more psychopathic. Um, and that's a different kettle of fish that we're not really getting into here. They tend to just treat everybody the same. But narcissists and bullies tend to be very careful. They don't bully everybody. We also can't imagine that people could be so callous. And I mentioned this earlier on. We don't expect people to barefaced lie. We don't expect people to just not tell the truth, to look us in the eye and to gaslight us. We just don't expect that. And so that's how a lot of people get away with the type of behavior that they do, because they present themselves as being very plausible. You know, it's only after a while when you've been around that person. And quite often as well, what I find is people don't tend to last in the same organization for a long time if they're this type of behavior. They tend to have kind of worn everyone out and gone somewhere else. Tends to they tend to kind of move around. Not always. It tends to be a bit of a trait because they run out of supply in one organization unless it's the CEO or one of the main directors, and we'll come on to that because I had somebody ask me about that in the Q&A, so we'll come on to that later. So we can't imagine people could be so callous. And in society as well, we often victim blame. Well, you should stand up to him. Well, what are you doing to provoke that? Well, you shouldn't let him do that, or you shouldn't let her do that. So it can be difficult to spot. And this is one of the things that I say when I'm doing my HR training, is just because you think Emily's a wonderful person doesn't mean that she's not a bully. Just because you think James is wonderful doesn't mean that he's not a bully. You can't go, because they're very clever at who they manipulate and how they present themselves. So, you know, they can present themselves very nicely but have a wicked side. So that's why they can be often very difficult to spot. I think by now you're probably getting the answer to this. Can you change a narcissist? No, absolutely not. There is no way. Can a narcissist change if they want to? Yes, but there's got to be something in it for them. One of the things that when I've worked with people on narcissistic personal relationships, I don't do it very often. I don't do a lot of private work. I tend to just do organizational work on the whole, but not always. Sometimes it comes up that people have narcissistic partners and they'll say, should I get him to go to counseling? Should I get him to go to therapy? And my answer to that is just be really careful, because there are not that many therapists who are as aware now as even you guys are from maybe the research you've done or even coming on this training. I know I train therapists and there are so few who know about this. So what a narcissist, very clever, very manipulative. So they will very easily convince the therapist that the problem is the partner. So when I'm training therapists, I give them a list of behaviors to look out for. Does the partner, not the one we suspect of being narcissist, does the partner, are they very quiet? Do they look downtrodden? Do they find it really difficult to speak up? Does the other person do all the speaking? Do they seem to have all the control? It's those sorts of things that you have to look out for, because they'll very quickly, if they think they can manipulate the therapist, that's what they're going to do. Narcissists are only going to go to therapy if they think that they're going to get some reward from it. Because another thing that you don't want to do is go to therapy with a narcissist, because if you start opening up more, they're just learning more about you, just learning more that they can use against you. So can a narcissist change? No, because usually they don't want to. They're quite happy. They don't necessarily notice that there's some stuff going on deep down. So, no, but you can change the environment, and that's what we're starting to look at now. Narcissism and bullying thrive in toxic environments. It thrives where people pretend it isn't happening, where they don't see it or refuse to see it because that person's lovely to me. So they don't even want to go out. And I do sometimes, one of the things that's come out from the feedback from many of my videos and private messages that I get is, I told HR, but they didn't do anything about it. We'll come on to that in a bit. But, that can often be one, because it falls into the too hard to deal with category, or that person presents themselves as being the life and soul and really lovely, or they're very senior, and that's even harder. But we'll come on to those things. What I like to say is, if you do nothing about it, especially if you see it and you do nothing about it, that makes you complicit. And I would really urge you, if you are witnessing any of these types of behaviours, whether they're happening to you or whether they're happening to a colleague, that you please either do something about it or back that person up, help and support them, even send them to my stuff. I've got so much free content on this that please, it's all about education and awareness. I want to talk about the grey rock technique. I do have a complete video on this from beginning to end. And again, I'll put it in the notes. But the grey rock technique, if this is happening to you, whether it's a personal relationship or whether it's a workplace relationship, the grey rock technique is the best way of dealing with somebody who is either a bully or narcissistic. So, what is the grey rock technique? You might already know it, but I'm going to go over it anyway. If the firstly, before I get into that, the very best way of getting a narcissist out of your life, because it can be tricky, especially in a personal relationship, it can be very tricky to get rid of them once they're there, if they haven't used you up enough, if they haven't got all the supply they think they can get from you. The number one way and the only real way to deal and get a narcissist out of your life is to go completely no contact, whether that's a family member, whether that's a partner, whether that's a boss. Hard when it's a boss, which is where the grey rock technique comes in, and very difficult as well if you're having to co-parent. So if you can't go completely no contact, and I say sometimes I will have clients come to me and they've got a narcissistic partner, and I explain the only way to deal with it is grey rock, is no contact. They're not willing to do that, but they are in a couple more rounds of the cycle. But going completely no contact is the only way, because they will try and get back in touch with you, sometimes even years later, because not that they care about you at all, they just think, oh, I'll just see if I can get a little bit of supply off that person. And any response, whether it's telling them to go away or whatever you say to them, they don't care. It's a response. They're happy with that. They know they can still rattle you, and that's narcissistic supply. So the number one tactic is no contact, hands down. That's blocking them. That is not looking at them on social media. That is just literally locking down everything so they can't get to you, blocking your phone, blocking your social media, blocking their email, everything. You don't want to see those people, because as soon as their name drops into your inbox or drops onto your phone, it's going to trigger your fight, flight, freeze. That's no good. So number one way is no contact. Second is grey rock technique. So if you can't completely get rid of that person out of your life, if you have to co-parent, if you have to work with them, if they're a colleague, because sometimes it happens with colleagues, if they're a boss, the best way to deal with them is the grey rock technique. So if you think about a grey rock, it just sits there. It does nothing. It just doesn't move. It sits on its own, it's silent, and it's completely non-reactive. That's the way we need to be. So to go grey rock and I've got an article on it. It's called The Number One Strategy for Dealing with Bullies and Narcissists. And again, I've got a video on it, so I'll link those in the fact sheet. To go grey rock, we're going to do emotional detachment. So it's maintaining emotional neutrality. Because don't forget, what they want from you is supply. They want that narcissistic supply. They want to trigger you. They want the conflict. They want you to answer them back. They want you to kick off. They want you to be angry, upset. They want you to react in some way. When you emotionally detach and are emotionally neutral, you've taken away their supply. They don't like that because all they want from you is the supply. Really limit your personal information. So you're not going to share personal details with them. Any conversations you have with them, we're talking work-based now, are only work issues. If they ask you about the weekend, shrug, blank them, don't talk to them, walk away. Doesn't matter. You don't, because they're going to want to try and get in, because they're not going to, because all of this grey rock represents a loss of control for them. And that's what we're doing. We're giving you the control, not them. So limit the amount of personal information. If they walk into the room and you're talking to other people, stop talking. Don't tell them or change the subject to a work-based scenario. Be consistent in your responses. So don't have a good chat with them one day and then ignore them the next. Be consistent. If you're going to talk to them, you only talk about work, you only talk about facts, figures, and numbers, you only talk about the stuff that you absolutely have to talk about. Other than that, you walk out, you walk away, you ignore them, you carry on doing what you're going to do. Don't be rude, don't need to be rude, but you don't need to engage with them either. So you need to be consistent, be predictable and monotonous in your reactions. You just don't want to give them any supply. And again, some people go, oh, this is really hard. And when I say, if you do a reframe on it and think, well, actually, they've been controlling everything for a long time. This is you now controlling things. Be non-committal in your responses. So they are going to try and wind you up. They are going to try and trigger you. Just ignore it. No. Recognize what they're trying to do and don't go with it, because you're holding the power while you're doing this, not them, you. To avoid opinions and strong reactions, redirect conversations. So if they try to start to talk about personal stuff, guide it back to work, guide it towards neutral topics if you do have to talk to them. I would really recommend limiting your face-to-face interactions and to use written communications as much as possible. I'll talk about that in another slide. Really, really critical. Try not to see them face-to-face if at all possible. Benefits of grey rock. You're reducing the emotional impact on you. You're preserving your emotional well-being. There's less chance of them manipulating you. There's less chance of them winding you up and triggering you and triggering your fight, flight, freeze. You're depriving them of their narcissistic supply, which is what they live for. It's like I said at the beginning, it's like air and water. They can't live without it. So it's you taking back that control. You're maintaining a professional focus and preserving your workplace productivity while you're doing this, because I know how much this impacts and how much it plays on your mind if you're going through any kind of bullying. It just takes over your entire life. It's so detrimental. And, you know, whatever's going on in work, we take home with us and it affects our home life. And these people are not worth it. Not worth it. It also helps avoid escalating the conflict. You are establishing the personal control, and they will not know what the heck has happened. They won't like it, but they won't know. They won't see it coming. They won't think that you will have it in you to be able to do this. And so it gives you quite a lot of power. It creates psychological distance and reduces that psychological impact on you as well. So it's hugely powerful. I'm not saying it's always easy, because sometimes you might see their behavior escalate. And we'll talk more about what we do that in a couple of slides. You might see it escalate because, sometimes if they feel that they've lost control over you, then that can be really difficult. All of these things that I've talked about with Grey Rock work in personal relationships as well. So if it's about the kids, if you've got children, it's pick up dates, it's pick up times, it's not ever responding to the text on a Saturday night or a miss you or the kind of, them doing the breadcrumbing or the trying to start the love bombing phase again, because that does happen. 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, you might get something drop in. You don't respond. You don't respond unless it's a question about the kids and something that is a must know. You don't respond. You don't respond to anything. That will escalate. I had a client a few weeks ago who started using Grey Rock with her ex, and oh my goodness, she must have got 60 texts, 60, one after another for hours, because he didn't like the fact that she was not replying to him. That was not acceptable, even though they were divorced. It wasn't a question about the kids either. It was just him needing control. So Grey Rock, you can use it. You can use it with friends, family members, work colleagues, partners, ex-partners. It's really useful if you can't go no contact. Challenges and considerations. Going Grey Rock is not easy because they're not going to like it, but you need to be consistent. You can't be really friendly with them one day and then Grey Rock the next and then flip flop between the two. Doesn't work that way. I would never recommend that you do that. You need to be consistent. You might slip in a moment of weakness because we're all human, but then you re-establish it straight away. Effectiveness may vary depending on the person, depending on how narcissistic that person is. And, I would always err on the side of caution as well, because there are some very unstable people out there, sadly. And there is the potential for isolation. So, you might get cut off from all of his family and flying monkeys and all kinds of things. So just be mindful when you're using Grey Rock. It is the second best technique, but there are downsides to it as well. So, setting boundaries. Just let me have a little drink. Okay. This is really critical. Boundary setting at the beginning of any relationship um, is really important. And unfortunately, as I said right at the beginning, during the love bombing phase and at the beginning of the devaluation phase, that's when a narcissist is testing your boundaries, because usually they know in the love bombing phase if they will tend to cross your boundaries during the love bombing phase. It's part of their testing the water to see how much they can get away with. Because people who have healthy boundaries would never divulge as much information as maybe somebody without those healthy boundaries would. So setting boundaries is really important, especially at the beginning of any relationship. However, even a way down the road, you can still implement boundaries. So let's look at boundaries. First of all, you have to get clear on what your boundaries are. Now, if you grew up like I did, and I'm very open about my upbringing, if you've watched my videos, you'll know how open I am. I had a very difficult childhood, and there were no boundaries in our family whatsoever. We just were not allowed to have boundaries. Consequently, it's taken me a while to be able to establish boundaries or even get clear on what my boundaries are, because I was never allowed them. So you don't even necessarily know what boundaries you would want. So, first off, I would suggest, if you're not great at setting boundaries, is to get a pen and paper and write down what you would want your boundaries to be. Here are some guidelines. Emotional boundaries. So, what are the emotional things that you don't want to talk about? And if somebody starts to push your boundaries, and again, video on this, I'll put it in the notes. You're going to say something like, "I'm not comfortable talking about that." You're going to push back, but you've got to know what your boundary is to begin with. So, what are your emotional boundaries? What are the things you're not willing to talk about? You're not willing to get into, especially in a workplace scenario. What are your time boundaries? Because this is one of the things that I see really frequently where bosses in particular are stamping over people and not respecting time boundaries or not respecting work-life balance and expecting people to be available literally 24/7. That's what happened in my scenario. I know it's a long time ago now, but I still do see it with clients. I was expected to be available 24, literally 24/7. Even when I went on holiday or vacation, I was expected to have my phone on and be doing emails, and I was working at least 80 hours a week. That's not acceptable. I wasn't paid for that. So I didn't set any boundaries and I should have done. So time boundaries. So think about what the time boundaries are for you. It might be that you will answer emergencies outside your working hours, or it might be that you will be an hour after your normal end time. But be clear on what they are, and then you're going to communicate them if that boundary is crossed. What are your mental boundaries? You have the right to your opinion. I have the right to mine. So it's when people start to cross your mental boundaries. So think about what they are for you. And what are your physical boundaries? Because some people will really push those, especially in a workplace scenario. Those people, I had a boss once, it was so uncomfortable. She rolled up behind me on a chair. So I was sitting at my desk, she rolled up behind me, and I'd only been there maybe a month, and she put her chin on my shoulder. Oh my goodness. I've never felt so uncomfortable. And it was really, I thought it was really odd and it was difficult to tackle. So it's knowing that you can have a conversation with somebody and go, that's not somebody standing too close to you, somebody touching you. Again, that's a boundary. But you need to know what your boundary is, because especially with personal space, there are rings to personal space. So we have a ring that we let our close family members in. Then it goes a little bit out to our friends and family, or family, friends, and outwards for work colleagues. It's probably a couple of feet away from us. So think about what they are, and it is never too late to start setting boundaries. And we can set strong boundaries, but you need to be clear on what they are, because you can't set a boundary unless you've thought about what that boundary is. So again, I've got a video and I've got lots of different articles on my website on setting boundaries with friends, parents, partners. So I haven't done videos on all of those. I've done one on workplace boundaries, a video on workplace boundaries, but I do have a lot of articles on my website on boundary setting. Okay, some further advice. This is so important. If you recognize that you're being bullied, whether there's narcissism involved or not, please, please keep diary notes of every single interaction you have with that person. So you're going to write what the situation was, when did it happen, so dates and times, who was it with, who were the witnesses, what did they say? How did it make you feel? That's really quite an important one, because we sometimes forget that. But I don't know if I've said this, I was 20 years as a human resources professional before I set up my own coaching practice. And that's one thing that I would say to people is make sure you record how it makes you feel, because you're not necessarily going to remember that months later. But keep those notes of those interactions. I think it's really useful. And you know what? I would also do that from a personal relationship perspective as well, because sometimes we can look back and think, oh, it wasn't that bad. But actually, keeping the diary notes and keeping the information on these different things. I did this with another client a few weeks ago. I got her, she went, oh, well, there's only a couple of times he's been mean to me. Really? And what are they? And she started to list them, and there were actually 24 times in the last 3 months that he'd done things that were really not acceptable. But when she'd never said them all out loud at the same time, or and she said, "I'm going to go away and I'm going to write them down because then when he's starting to love bomb me again, I'm going to be able to see." Just be really careful where you keep those types of things. From a work-based perspective, I would also say be really careful where you keep that information. Don't keep it on your work laptop. Don't keep it in a workbook in your office drawer if you are office based, or workplace based, if that makes sense. Keep it somewhere safe. I did this when I was being bullied. I would actually openly, whenever he was mean to me or was really, did something really inappropriate and some really inappropriate things, I would literally flip to the back of my notepad where, I didn't use my laptop much then. And I'd just literally make notes and I'd be looking at him while I was writing the notes down. So, really important. Also, keep an evidence file. So, keep a screenshot of texts, emails, documents, photos. Now, this is one that some people have an issue with. Now, you can't necessarily use audio recordings. And I know in America, different states have different rules about whether you can record people unknowing, but I'm not talking about using this for a court case. I'm talking about using audio recordings for yourself so that you can listen back to what was happening. Because sometimes when we're in a situation, we're being gaslit, we can't necessarily remember what was happening and we can tend to get bamboozled. But I would always say keep an evidence file, text, emails, documents. A lot of people don't think to do these two things. They don't tend to think to keep the evidence. And they can have been being abused for over a year in work and not have any of that. Now, it's incredibly hard to raise a formal issue against somebody without any evidence. In fact, if you go to HR and you don't have any of that stuff, they're not going to be able to do anything. And then the abuser will know that you're onto them. Things can escalate and it can get really nasty. So, what I would say is please, 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 please keep that evidence. Tell somebody sooner rather than later. HR, your line manager. I didn't tell anybody. There was only the CEO I could have gone to in my situation, and the CEO was his friend. So there wasn't really anybody anywhere I could go. But still, I do wish I'd brought it to the CEO's attention. I wish I'd done something about it sooner rather than later, because by the time I left from my bullying experience, I am now 125 pounds and I was under 100 pounds. So what was that? I was like 7 stone something. I was very tiny and I'm 5'5". I was very ill by the time because he was just constant abuse, coercive control. It was just horrendous. And that's what I say now. You must tell somebody, you've got to nip this stuff in the bud and you've got to tell somebody sooner rather than later. Educate yourself and others. That's why these sessions, the stuff that I've done online, I don't get paid for the stuff online that I've done, but I just think I'm so passionate. It's so important, I think, to raise awareness. So educate yourself, educate others, get some support. Yes, tell your friends and family, and but again, unless people really know about narcissism, quite often you'll find that people will say, "Oh, it can't be that bad. Oh, it's just you." No, no. And also, I have seen it because I know, because I train therapists um, and coaches, that a, a lot of therapists don't know about narcissism, and so they can be trying to help you overcome things when actually you're never going to overcome them because the person's got massive narcissistic traits. So if you do get some support, either coaching or therapy, please make sure that they're trauma informed and aware of personality disorders. That doesn't mean that they can diagnose, because that's very specialist, but just to be aware, like we've discussed today, we're not diagnosing today, we're just talking about the traits. It's so important. Otherwise, I've seen people come to me and they've had a year worth of therapy, come to me and I've unpicked everything in 2 sessions. And they've gone, "Oh my goodness, why didn't my therapist know?" Because we don't necessarily think that these people are out there. So Those things are super important. I've got some questions again about telling people in work, and I'll come on to those in a bit. But what I would say is we all have choices about where we work. My advice would be yes, tell somebody, give them the chance to do something about it. But if they're not going to do something about it, you get yourself out sooner rather than later. Now, I know what the global economy is like right now, but there are always ways out. I have online courses about how to write a CV, job hunting, interview skills. There is help out there. There are recruitment consultants that will help you. There are jobs out there if you're willing to look for them. The longer you stay in an abusive relationship, whether that's at work or at home, the harder it is to overcome it, the longer it takes to recover. So my biggest regret is to not leave when it first started happening and letting it go on for almost 2 years, because it took a long time to recover from. So we all have choices. Get out sooner rather than later. If you're seeing the red flags, if you're seeing those signs, start to look. You can raise it, but if nothing is done about it, which is unfortunately more the case than I see it being fixed, then you need to go somewhere where you're appreciated, where you're valued, where your values match the organisation. So really, really important. Advice for organisations, I'm going to whistle through this one. Have a robust anti-bullying policy. Take a zero tolerance approach. Have a whistleblowing policy. Focus on patterns of behaviour rather than the person. So that's where the evidence comes in. It's looking at all. If you could have seen all the evidence I had, pages and pages and pages of the most outrageous things, you can't then, with so many things, you can't then say, well, it's you. It- there are actual examples and witnesses. So focus on the patterns rather than the person, because don't forget, they can be very charismatic. Create a safe place for people to talk. Train your staff. Awareness is everything. Train in the UK, we have mental health first aiders. I recommend training them what to look out for uh, around personality traits and around narcissism and bullying in the workplace, and provide coaching or therapy. But again, if you're going to choose a provider, please make sure that they're trauma informed and they know about antisocial personalities. Really important. Okay, so coming to the end now. You've been very patient with me. Summary. Narcissism is a real thing. Even if it's not diagnosed, you can see that you can see the traits quite clearly. Research does suggest that it's on the increase. They think it's something to do with social media. I'm not quite as up as I was a while ago on those studies, but they do suggest that it's on the increase. Bullying thrives where people pretend not to see it. So if it's happening to you, call it out. If you're seeing it happen to somebody else, call it out. We all have choices about where we work. So if you raise it and nothing is done, that's clearly a values violation. So I would consider looking elsewhere sooner rather than later. Take it from somebody who's been through it. No job is worth risking your mental health for, or your physical health, because if your mental health is impacted, your physical health will be too. No job. No job is worth that. Please get out sooner rather than later. Finally, got some additional resources. Lizzie, if you're still here, you've looked at my YouTube channel, you know I've got lots on there. I also have a blog, twice weekly blog. Dr. Romney DeVassola, she is amazing. She's got lots of books. She has a really good YouTube channel. I don't mind sharing her stuff as well, because she just is incredible. She's all over Instagram. She's got a podcast, books. She's great. And also there are some books that I recommend there. Psychopath Free is really good. In Sheep's Clothing is good. And Boundaries is another really good one. So some additional stuff that will be in the fact sheet as well. And finally, I would love a follow on social media if you wouldn't mind. There are all my social media things. And if you do go over to YouTube, if you haven't done already, I would love it if you could do a like, comment, subscribe type thing, because it really does make a massive difference with the algorithms.
Yeah, Joe. Hi,
Yes.
it's Bill. I guess one of the obvious questions for me is, whilst understanding the underlying drivers
Mm,
in an organization, what are the preconditions for this kind of person to thrive in? The preconditions of the culture. What are the challenges that can prevent people at various levels? Because narcissism can take place at all sorts of levels that
yeah.
we might not dream of.
Yes.
And sometimes when you think, oh, yes, I need to speak to somebody about it, you don't even know if they're trained or whether or not they're actually part of the flying monkeys.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem that we have. And, I'll tell you two of the questions that I got here is, what do you do if the narcissist or the bully is the CEO? And
Yeah.
that's come up in the training that I've done as well with HR people. And what to do if HR don't listen. So, it is an issue. So what I always suggest in this scenario is you raise it with whoever, with your boss, or you raise it with HR. Then if nothing is done and it escalates, it's almost then you have a decision to make whether that organization's values fit with yours. Because quite often I see that you can have the right job in the wrong organization. Your fit doesn't fit with them. So it's about them making a decision. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, because so many people you'll see on my videos, HR are rubbish, HR do nothing, HR, you shouldn't even bother going to HR. Now, I always say you should always give the organisation a chance to sort the issues out, because I have seen it where it has worked. I have
Mm.
seen it where it's been raised and it has been successfully dealt with. I know, because I've been part of those processes, but it is quite rare.
Well,
ha- I have to say. And there are certain professions that lean more towards almost rewarding that type of behavior. So one of the areas I see it in are, and it's really quite frequent, the emails that I tend to get from people are from either sales, banking, and law, where
mm,
it's almost rewarded to be. Oh, and the other one was police. It's quite rampant, I
mm,
believe, from what I understand from all the feedback I get, is quite rampant in the police force, because
yeah,
people are attracted, people with that need to control, that need to be grandiose, are attracted to roles where they can be that, and be unchallenged.
yeah, yeah. Because the reason why I was asking the question was that it seems to me at times, and again, I'm coming off the wall here to say that in some organisations you see the precondition of wanting to succeed, to be one of those flying monkeys. You want to be part of the
Yes,
in crowd,
yes.
and therefore, because success now is very complex
Mhm.
and the way it's perceived, people will take the risk of joining in the
They will.
narcissism rather than doing the right thing and speaking up about it, because you don't know how many there are within your organization. So, can you take the risk?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why these flying monkeys can be such a threat. Because
Mm,
that's kind of one of the things that I got. You don't want to get on the bad side, because you don't want it turning against you. You see the behavior that's
yeah,
happening to that person, and you think, God, I'm not going to say anything, because I don't want that coming back on me. that's going to be career limiting because I'm going to be feeling like that person is. So
Yeah.
better I don't say anything. And in fact, I'm going to, we also I talked a little bit about um, the way teams, the way our early ancestors and tribes were structured. Well, we still have that today. The modern day team is the modern day tribe. And we do all tend to follow the leader, even if the leader's not great,
Yeah.
because it's the way we've survived as a species for the last however many thousands of years and evolved and still managed to be here.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
So it's very difficult. It's very difficult. This whole situation is very difficult, and that's why I think it's important to talk about it. Do you
I
have any
agree.
other questions?
Not me personally, but I'm
Right.
interested in any other questions
I
from
will
other
I
people.
will answer these, Lizzie. I don't know if you have. Oh yes, Lizzie, please bob it in. Shall I answer? Oh, she's typing. I will answer these while we're talking. I think I might have answered this one. What to do if HR don't listen? Unfortunately, I would say, in my experience, I'd say 80% of the time, nothing is done. And that's a guesstimate, of course, but yeah, it's not ideal. So what I do say is you raise it. I would always recommend that you raise it because I think that's really important. But if nothing is done, then you have to consider what your exit strategy is,
Mm.
or maybe even moving to another team if you want to stay within the organization and it's not a rampant culture. Because sometimes it is. You sometimes see this as well, where there is a change of CEO. There's a change of CEO. CEO tends to bring in his own or her own people underneath, and then it changes the entire culture. And well, you've definitely seen that then, Bill. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Um, You have a question, Lizzie. Once a victim, always a victim. What are your thoughts on repeated victimhood? Okay, I do have thoughts on that because for me, it's all about education. You don't have to always be a victim. Um, I've said that I've been subjected to it a couple of times or so throughout my lifetime. And now I've done so much research and I know so much about it. It doesn't happen now because I don't allow it because I see the red flags. I have strong boundaries in place. So for me, the victimhood piece is about being armed. It's about knowing what's happening. It's about awareness, which again is why I keep doing these videos because it has happened. What I see in pretty much everyone I work with, coaching from a coaching perspective, it has happened to them multiple times, typically because it happened in childhood. That was normalized in childhood. And so we don't necessarily see those behaviors as the red flags that other people might do. So if that's the case, it's about awareness and it's
Mm.
about being really clear about your boundaries, about what is acceptable, about what is not acceptable. It's about looking at the love bombing if somebody's coming on really quickly. It's about taking that step back. But most importantly, I think it is about when that first devaluation thing happens, because there's always a first time the devaluation starts, you nip that straight in the bud and you do no, thanks. And that can be really incredibly difficult because typically, if you grew up in a household where there were no boundaries and you couldn't say no, and it's very hard to say no if that's not what you were allowed to do as a child.
Mm.
But it's practice. And if you miss it the first time, don't let it go the second time. And it's like building a muscle. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. But I think for me, that bit that I said about the confusion, if I tell somebody something about something and I start to feel a bit like, oh, that's a bit of an odd. I just told you that really serious thing and you've gone, or they just thought, and that's a massive red flag for me.
Mm.
So, and from a work scenario, occasionally, I had it really quite recently actually. I didn't like how somebody was interacting with me. They were going to give me quite a big piece of work, but there was something really off. There was something really off couldn't necessarily put my finger on it, but I didn't like the way they were speaking to me. There was an edge to it. There was something just not, and ordinarily, I would have just gone along with it, especially when you work for yourself, because you think, well, that's a big chunk of money. But actually, there was something in me that went, no, this is going to be really painful. There's something really not right here. Cut it. And I've maybe done that 3 or 4 times in the last few years because I've just felt it. And then afterwards, I've gone, yeah, that absolutely was the right decision. That would have been a nightmare.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's about, I would say it's about tuning into and acting on the way you feel. Because I think I said that on the red flags. When you start to overshare or somebody just makes you not feel comfortable, got
Yeah.
to act on it and do something about it. So I hope that answers that, Lizzie. Do you have anything else for me? I'll just have a little look here. Um, what if the bully is a CEO? And again, I think that I know that's come from an HR person. How I'll answer that same as I did in another session that I did. I just said, well, basically, you have a choice whether you stay there or not. If that culture doesn't match with you and your values, you are never going to be happy there. You cannot necessarily change the CEO. So it's either grey rock, go somewhere else where you're going to be valued. The other was the bully in our organisation is the CEO's PA. We've raised it with the PA, with the CEO, but he won't listen. What do we do? I would then take it to the rest of the board and maybe have a chat with them about it, about what you're going to do, because the board will know as well. They will, the rest of the team would know. And I have seen a very similar one where I gave that advice and they did do that and it worked out. The PA is no longer there because actually, when everybody joined forces, I went to the CEO, he couldn't ignore it anymore because, of course, she was sweetness and light and wonderful to him. She was a dragon with everybody else and causing a complete nightmare. So, yes, that's what I would say on that one. I did have questions on flying monkeys and grey rock, but I think I answered those. So, do we have anything else? Lizzie, can I have oh, she's typing. Yes, go on, go ahead. Has this been useful, Bill?
Sorry?
Has it been useful? Was the
I
session
think
useful?
it's a very good reminder on the rules of the game. I think, as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, and even when you're at work, you have to remember work is a stage, and you should never take yourself that seriously that you let your guard down because you never know who you could be speaking to.
No, and it's really quite scary. It's
Yeah.
really quite scary what these people can do, and that's why we don't. If you're not brought up that way in a backbiting or a, you don't, you would never think that these people exist. I had one organisation, they asked me to do some mediation between these people in a team. And when I went back and said, you've got a real problem here, they laughed. They were like, oh, don't be ridiculous. That's just in storybooks. And it was like,
Yeah.
it's not. It's not.
Uh,
Here we go. So we talked about the relationship of the flying monkeys with the bully, but what about the relationship with the victim? Um, I think I'm reading into this that you mean what about the flying monkey's relationship with the victim?
yeah.
Well, it can be really interesting because they can be very two-faced. That's why I say be really careful because they can be really lovely to you and they can actually really be quite empathetic, but they might be going back and telling the narcissist, the bully, because they're going to get brownie points for that. So
Yeah.
I would just be really careful who you talk to and kind of what you say to them, because sometimes I've known it where the narcissist or the bully has sent the flying monkeys out to go and find information.
Yeah.
So yes, that would be my advice there. If you know they're close with the narcissist, which they're a flying monkey, so I'm guessing you know they're a flying monkey, so you know they're close. Really be really grey rock. Grey rock.
So time to listen to your inner voice at
That's the
times.
one. That's the
Yeah,
one. Well, guys, we're on time now. Oh, thank you. Hope you found that useful. Within the next 24 hours, you'll have the link to be able to do a rewatch, and also you'll have the fact sheet as well. But thank you for listening to the other questions that people have sent in. And
excellent.
I hope to see you again at some point. Thank you so much for listening to me for 2 hours.
No worries. Great
Thank you
stuff.
so
Take
much.
care.